This plant over here looked like this just about a year ago. Hi everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Jan, also known as Sydney Plant Guy, and I love growing large aeroids indoors. We're back with a plant spotlight, and today we're focusing on one of the probably most underrated philodendron in my opinion, Philodendron ERNESTII. As always, I want to share with you the journey the plant and I have been through together, and then I will talk to you about anything I learned about this plant. I haven't had this plant for all too long. I've had it for around about 18 months. So I got it in July 2021. I couldn't find a photo of when I first got it, but I found this photo that the seller sent me when I bought it. So this is what it looked like in July 2021. And it actually still has some of its oldest leaves. And I'll pop in a photo over here. It's still at the bottom of the pole. I'm having a really hard time getting the whole plant in frame. That's also why I'm sitting so far back. So I'm going to have to just put in a few close-ups on screen for you so you know. But I still have one of the original leaves right here at the bottom of the pole, which also means that this plant has not yet gone through full chop and extend. It just really matured really quickly. In August 21, I popped it on a pole. It's just that pole in the middle in that photo on screen. And you can see it hasn't really it's so small, you can't really even see it in that photo. But as always, I love starting my plants on moss poles when they're still really small. Of course, before potting them up, I make sure they have a good enough root system. But I want to get them onto that pole as soon as possible so that every single new growth that the plant produces can attach itself to the pole and start growing a large root system. And giving it that pole worked wonders straight away. In November 21, you can see that it really started increasing in leaf size as soon as it started attaching itself to that pole. And with the increase in leaf size, it also transforms a little bit in shape. So when I first got it, the leaves were still a little bit roundish. But over time, the leaves started getting a little bit more elongated. All right, and if we're looking at that photo of January 2022, you can see that it's still continuously increasing in leaf size, and it's really starting to transform in shape a little bit as well. It starts getting these really nice little lobes at the top over here. Another couple of months later, the plant is only really halfway up its first moss pole, but it has reached substantial leaf size already. So that's probably one of the things I love the most about this plant. It's just the speed in which it increases in leaf size. Around August, September, I don't remember exactly when, but it reached the top of its moss pole and I gave it an extension. And then I got that photo from September 2020 where you can see where the plant has then started growing its first leaf on that moss pole extension, which was around about, I think, this one over here. Right, and another 3 months later, it has now reached the top of its full moss pole, so it now has climbed up 180 centimeters in around about 18 months. What have I learned about this plant? As I mentioned before, it matures really, really quickly. So let me see if that works. If you can see these leaves at the bottom, I mean, this one over here is still so small. So within just 180 centimeters of moss pole, it went from leaves of this size to leaves of this size over here. The newest one is still really fresh and hasn't fully inflated. So I reckon this will get a little bit larger even than this one over here. But I mean, that is a huge increase in leaf size within just one extended moss pole. But also the shape of the leaf has changed so much. Like, I love growing plants that change in leaf size and shape with every single leaf. I think it's just so interesting to witness the whole journey of that plant, and you never know what you're going to get with the next leaf. So I really appreciate that. At the beginning, this plant was growing in my bedroom, and if you watched any of my previous videos, you'd know that the bedroom is where I keep all of my precious plants, so all of my velvet philodendron, some of my anthuriums that have grown too large for the IKEA cabinet and so on. Just because it's a much smaller room, so I can control the environment much better and provide them with kind of like as close as possible to optimal conditions. So I put it in my bedroom at the beginning, and I was not surprised that it was having a really easy time growing. If you want to learn more about the bedroom overall, the video I uploaded just before this one is actually a full apartment update. So if you're interested in the growing conditions of all of the rooms and all of the plants that I'm growing, I'll link that video at the end screen for you to check out. But this plant has grown so large that I had to move it out of my bedroom around about August, September of this year. Problem with it is really it has such huge leaves and long petioles that it's just taking over. And a lot of the other plants that don't have quite as long petioles and such large leaves were just being shaded by this plant. So it was preventing other plants from maturing in the way that I want them to. It was just taking up too much light. So I moved it into the living area. The main difference is really the humidity. I get very similar light levels in both of my areas, but the humidity in the living area is much lower due to it being a larger room and the window is pretty much always being open. So I wasn't too sure how it's going to cope with the decrease in humidity, but I haven't really noticed it being unhappy at all. Maybe the one thing that has changed is the internodal spacing has grown a little bit, but that wouldn't be based on humidity. That would be probably due to decreased light levels. It is actually living right here, normally in front of me. I just moved it to the side, you guys, so you guys can actually see me. But this is the spot where it actually lives in. So it lives kind of like the farthest away from the window out of all of my plants. So it gets probably the least light. But what I've noticed, and not just with this plant, with a lot of plants overall, is once they reach a certain stage of maturity and they've got large leaves, they seem to be able to cope with suboptimal conditions a little bit better because they're already grown a little bit more resilient and they just have more leaves and more, I don't know, like I feel like as soon as they become a little bit older, they're not so fussy, especially when they're small plants. That's when I really try and optimize the conditions I give them because they're the most vulnerable. Once they're grown into like a full-fledged plant, I feel like I'm less worried about it. So yeah, I mean, maybe it even appreciated the lower light levels because it is a plant with huge leaves. So obviously it also has a lot of surface area to get burned if you give it too much light. So overall, I don't think it seems to be too fussed with lower light conditions and lower humidity conditions. But I do believe that starting it off when it was still small in an environment that was more humid with more bright indirect light probably gave it that kickstart that it really needed. If I wouldn't have done that at the beginning, the plant would probably not look like what it looks like right now. The frequency in it pushing out new leaves really started increasing over summer. So it does appreciate the, more light, warmer temperatures and so on. But as it matures, the frequency of each leaf also decreases again. So obviously when it's small and it's pushing out just small leaves, it pushes out these small leaves quite frequently, quite quickly. But now that it's pushing out these huge leaves, it takes a little while longer to work on a leaf that size. So despite the fact that we've just gone into spring and it's growing quite fast, the growth rate has definitely slowed down since it has matured. But instead, the internodal spacing has increased. So it actually climbed that second moss pole really, really quickly compared to that first moss pole. It roots super easily into the moss pole, and it roots really easily into that moss pole. All I really do is keep my moss pole moist, and I do that by watering it using my bottle upside down watering technique. And I water it approximately twice a week using around about 1 liter with each watering. Once a week, I also add a liquid fertilizer, GT Australia Foliage Focus, into my water so that I provide all of the roots within the moss pole as well as the pot sufficient nutrients. Now, over the years, I've gotten really good at knowing how much water each of my moss poles can take. So I don't often deal with excess water draining from the pole into the pot into the planter. But that is really important. I don't ever want the pot sitting in just excess water that's accumulating in the planter. So you don't really need to worry about the water, the amount that you water, as long as you have a really well draining mix. And I use my aeroid mix as per my tutorial, which is always linked in my description. So I use that mix and it's so well draining and aerated. I don't ever need to worry about the volume of water because any excess is just going to drain. So I just need to make sure that I empty the excess around about, 30 minutes to an hour after I gave the plant a thorough watering. But I'm never worried about overwatering because the mix I use is so chunky and aerated. One thing I do need to worry about this, and it happens to me quite frequently as my plants get older and older, obviously all of these leaves are going to one side. So this is getting really top heavy and it's getting really front heavy. So by default, this pole just wants to lean forward. I found a planter that fits that 20 centimeter nursery pot like a glove. Like it honestly slides in and there is like no wiggle room whatsoever. So I can use that to my advantage by almost tilting the pole a little backwards. So with the pole tilted backwards, there not being any wiggle room between the planter and the pot and the leaves all dragging it forward again, it kind of balances itself out, if that makes sense. You can also add some stones to the base of the pole to kind of hold it in place a little bit better. But I don't really know if they do too much. Actually, I don't think they really do too much. But I think that is really the biggest challenge I have with these plants, specifically the ones that have really long petioles, because they just reach forward so much. And the reason that all leaves face the same direction is because I always make sure that my plants get uniform light from one direction. So the camera, you are right now sitting in on my balcony window, so all of the light is coming from that side. So of course, all leaves will start pointing that way to optimize photosynthesis. But I've never actually had any issue. Like I've never actually had a plant fall on me and just like die or like snap half its leaves off. I don't know if I've just been really lucky or not. I mean, some other plants like a Milano, for example, that keeps the petioles kind of closer to the pole. I haven't had any issues with that because it kind of keeps itself standing upright. It's really just with these ones that have the extremely long petioles. Of course, I could also give it a larger pot, but you guys know I love using smaller pots. It's just in a 20 centimeter pot. There's a few reasons for that. First of all, I want to minimize the space that it takes up. Second of all, I don't really need a larger pot because most of the root system is within the pole. And then thirdly, actually a smaller pot further decreases the risks of overwatering or root rot due to too much water being locked in the potting medium in itself. So there's a few reasons why I love having these small pots, but the only downside is really that, well, a small pot also gives you a smaller surface area, meaning that it's more likely to topple over, specifically with plants that start getting this large. From a pest perspective, I have not had any pests on this, but just judging by the leaves, I feel like spider mites would probably like it. I'm probably lucky that I have so many alocasias that the spider mites are just really busy already sucking on those leaves, so they don't even have time to look at my philodendron. But overall, I don't think it is necessarily a pest magnet, or at least not in my experience. One other thing I briefly want to address, because some of you might have noticed that my leaves have gotten really shiny out of a sudden. Now, I'm normally just a big believer of just cleaning the leaves using water, like it would happen in nature. But sometimes the leaves can start getting a little bit dull based on the water buildup on the leaves or based on the minerals that are in that water and so on. So I actually used a leaf shine for the first time the other day. And trust me, it was a lot of work doing that for all of my plants. Well, not all of them. I tried it on a few first, because whenever I try a new product, I don't want to try it out with my whole collection. What if the product is no good and I just used it on every single plant? So I thought I'll give it a try with this plant over here because it has really nice large leaves and it has, it's not velvet. So I wanted to bring out the sheen in it, and I really love how shiny it looks now. But I want to do it a couple of times. I want to see if the plant shows me any signs of stress as a result of it, or if it, I mean, one would hope it doesn't, but proof is in the pudding. I don't like to talk about a product I've only used once. I want to use it a little bit more often, and I want to use it over an extended period of time until I can confidently recommend it to you. But I'm sure if you Google it, there's probably 100 leaf shine products out there, and they probably all work okay. But just stay tuned on this one. But I wanted to address it because I saw a couple of comments already talking about how shiny the plant was in my last full apartment update. Alrighty, let's wrap it up with a little conclusion. So overall, it's one of the plants I would recommend if you are a beginner, for sure. It seems to be really easygoing. I haven't had any issues with it, and it increases in leaf size really quickly, making it an extremely rewarding plant to grow if you are able at any stage in your plant hobby, but specifically if you are still starting off and you don't have so many plants in your collection already, it's really a plant that can grow into a nice statement piece pretty quickly. Obviously, the availability is subject to wherever you live, but here in Australia, I don't actually see it being sold often. That doesn't make it rare. It was actually very affordable, and whenever I do see it for sale, it's always really affordable, but I just don't really see a crazy hype about it. And I don't know why, because what's there not to like? I'm sure people might not actually be aware of how fast it can grow into something really nice and large. So maybe that's why there's not too much hype. From a care perspective, probably the most important thing is that you give it something to climb on. And obviously I'm biased and I would recommend that you give it a moss pole. Make sure that you give it as much humidity as you can to optimize its growth. But I think this will be totally fine in normal household conditions of humidity around about 50%. Don't ever underestimate the importance of fertilizer. If you don't feed your plant, how is it ever going to grow nice and large? And of course, light is the most important factor in making your plant grow to maturity. So make sure that you give it sufficient light and let the plant tell you whether or not you are doing it. And the plant does that by giving you these beautiful leaves that transform in size and shape. I hope you found this video interesting. I hope you learned about this plant, and maybe this is the first time you learned about this plant, and maybe now it's on your wish list as well. If you enjoyed this video, I reckon you will absolutely love my full houseplant tour, which I'll link over here. Like, subscribe, and leave a nice comment, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.